Welcome to our meeting tonight regarding the city's housing element update. Before we get started, I'd like to turn it over to Pablo to discuss how to access the Spanish language channel.
Bueno, bienvenidos a esta reunión de elementos de viviendas. Si prefieres esta presentación en español, tenemos un intérprete con nosotros hoy en la reunión que estará interpretando. Para escuchar el audio en español, mire hacia la parte inferior de su pantalla en la barra de control. En el lado derecho hay un icono de globo con la etiqueta Interpretación. Haga clic en esta opción y elija Español. Para silenciar el audio en inglés de la reunión, elija Silenciar audio original. Nuestro intérprete estará dando la presentación simultáneamente.
Once again, I'd like to welcome you. My name is Carmela Campbell. I am the Economic and Community Development Director for the City of Union City. I'm happy that you turned out for our meeting tonight to discuss the city's housing element. With that, I will turn it over to Chelsea Payne, who is a member of the consultant team who is helping the city with this effort.
Thank you, Carmela. My name is Chelsea Payne, and I'm with Ascent. As Carmela said, we've been hired by the city to help with this housing element update. And here with me tonight on the Ascent team, I have Rebecca Pope, Heidi Jen Kwong, and Tracy Herbola, who are helping with logistics, and they're here to help answer any questions you have or help you troubleshoot any Zoom logistics. So please reach out through the Q&A with any issues. In tonight's presentation, I'm going to provide an overview of the project and talk about some of the key components of the housing element, including the fair housing assessment and the site's inventory. Just a reminder that tonight's meeting is being recorded and will be made available on the city website after the meeting. We will also be taking any questions or comments that you have at the end of the presentation. So please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen to make a comment or to ask a question. For those of you who are joining on a tablet or a smartphone, you're going to find the More option on the bottom of your screen. And in this menu, you will find the option to send a question. All right, so with those logistics covered, I'm going to jump right in. So first, what is the housing element? The housing element is an element or a chapter of the city's general plan. It looks at housing needs in the city and is a policy document that guides the city's actions related to housing development, programs, and services. While the housing element focuses on meeting the housing needs of existing city residents, it's also the city's plan for how it will accommodate its fair share of the future regional housing need. Every city and county in California is required to have a housing element and to update it every 8 years according to a state mandated schedule. The adoption deadline for the city's housing element is January 31st, 2023. Unlike other elements of the general plan, there are very detailed requirements in state law for what has to be addressed in the housing element. And the housing element is also the only element of the general plan that's reviewed and certified by the state for compliance with state law. And the Department of Housing and Community Development, or HCD, is the department that's responsible for this compliance review. There's a lot of information that goes into the housing element. We start by conducting a housing needs assessment to describe the housing needs of city residents And this includes residents with low income, seniors, people with disabilities, people experiencing homelessness, and other residents that have special housing needs. We conduct a very detailed inventory of all of the available housing sites in the city. We look at potential constraints to housing in an effort to reduce barriers to housing development. And there's a new requirement to conduct a fair housing assessment to understand if there are issues related to housing discrimination, segregation, or unequal access to opportunities. We evaluate the effectiveness of the programs in the existing housing element, and then based on all of our analysis and input from the community, we update the goals, policies, and implementation programs to address the city's housing needs. I'm going to touch on some key facts from our existing conditions analysis or our housing needs assessment. So first, a little bit on housing growth trends in Union City. Between 2000 and about 2008, there was a steady rate of housing development in the city. But since the Great Recession, that began around that time, around 2008, housing development has been relatively slow in Union City. And in fact, between 2010 and 2018, only about 200 housing units were built in the city. However, in the past couple of years, the city is starting to experience overall more interest in residential development, and we expect to see a lot more growth during this next housing element timeframe. Detached single-family homes continue to make up the largest proportion of the housing stock in Union City, making up 76% of all homes in 2020. Multifamily homes or apartments make up about 20% of the city's housing stock, and mobile homes 5%. However, as interest in multifamily residential development has increased, there is potential for these percentages to shift. We expect to see an increase in multifamily and a larger variety of housing types built in the future. As we all know, housing costs in California, and particularly in the Bay Area, are some of the highest housing costs in the country, and they've been increasing over the years. This chart shows home value trends in the Bay Area, Alameda County, and Union City. You can see that the median home values have increased substantially in the Bay Area, with Alameda County and Union City following very similar trends. As of December 2020, the median home value in Union City was $991,870. This is a 155% increase since 2001, where the median home value was $388,830. This slide shows that renters would need to make $7,317 a month, or the equivalent of $42 an hour, to afford the average asking rent of $2,195 a month in Alameda County. This is nearly 3 times the California minimum wage of $14 an hour. As you can see, several professions outlined here aren't making enough money to comfortably afford the average asking rent in the county. People working as home health and personal care aides, people in retail sales, childcare workers, janitors, and cleaners would need to pay more than half of their monthly income on rent. When we talk about low-income residents, so who are we talking about? We're talking about the people who in other areas of the state or of the country might be able to more easily afford housing, but they can't here because housing is so expensive in the Bay Area. We're talking about people working in the trades, in the service industry, waiters, baristas, teachers, nurses, firefighters, and seniors that are living on fixed incomes. A lot of people have to pay a good portion of their income on housing. And what do we mean by affordable housing? We're talking about housing that's affordable to your low, very low, and extremely low income households so that they are paying no more than 30% of their income on housing. These income categories are determined based on the area median income and different household sizes. In Alameda County, a 3-person household with a gross annual income of about $98,000 or less is considered a low-income household. A household at this income level can afford to pay about $2,400 for housing each month. A 1-person household earning $76,000 is considered low income and can afford to pay about $1,900 for housing each month. Bay Area residents have some of the highest housing costs in the nation, making homeownership out of reach for low-income and moderate-income households. As mentioned earlier, the median home value in Union City is just under $1 million. This is about $238,000 more than what's considered affordable to a moderate-income family that could afford to buy a home at around $750,000. The gap for low-income families is even greater. A low-income family that can afford a home that's priced around $470,000. That's a difference of over $520,000 from the median home value. Households that pay more than 30% of their gross income for housing are said to be cost burdened, meaning that they're paying too much for their housing. A household is said to be severely cost burdened if they're paying more than 50% of their income on housing. Overpayment is almost twice as common for renter households compared to owner households in Union City. Almost half of all renters in the city, around 47%, are overpaying for housing, compared to 28% of homeowners. Cost burden is an even greater issue for residents at the lower end of the income scale. 75% of extremely low income households in the city are overpaying for housing, with more than half severely cost burdened, meaning they're paying more than 50% of their income on housing. 70% of very low income households are overpaying, and 59% of low income households are cost burdened, compared to about 12% of above moderate income households. With such high housing costs, many lower income families have to choose between paying rent or paying for other basic needs, while others are forced into overcrowded housing conditions or join the increasingly large population of people experiencing homelessness. This chart shows that the number of people experiencing homelessness in Alameda County has continued to increase year by year, nearly doubling since 2009. The county conducts a point-in-time count every 2 years to get data on the number of people experiencing homelessness. The last point-in-time count for which we have results was conducted in 2019, and it found a total of over 8,000 individuals in Alameda County experiencing homelessness. 106 unsheltered individuals were found in Union City the night of the count. The 2022 point-in-time count just happened last week, and we are expecting to receive those results in the upcoming months. And we expect that the numbers will only increase as the pandemic has put even more pressure and strain on our most vulnerable residents. One of the most significant new requirements for this housing element update is the requirement to address fair housing. Assembly Bill 686 adds new requirements to the housing element, but also more broadly affects the policies and programs of public agencies in California. Now, all public agencies must administer housing and community development programs in a manner that affirmatively furthers fair housing, or AFFH for short. This means taking meaningful actions to combat discrimination, overcome patterns of segregation, and foster inclusive communities where everyone has equal access to opportunities. In the housing element, we are required to prepare a fair housing assessment that analyzes 5 categories of topics: fair housing enforcement and outreach, trends related to segregation and integration, racially and ethnically concentrated areas of poverty, as well as racially concentrated areas of affluence. We look at disparities in who has access to opportunity and disproportionate housing needs and displacement risk facing the local community. We also evaluate the location of sites for lower income housing to ensure that new lower income units are built in areas of opportunity, to ensure that these individuals and households have fair access to education and economic resources. Next slide, please. One of the key things we look at in the fair housing assessment is access to opportunity. Access to opportunity refers to geographic access to goods, resources, and services, such as employment, education, and transportation, that offer individuals the best chance at economic advancement, high educational attainment, and good physical and mental health. Historically, across the country, affordable housing has been disproportionately developed in minority neighborhoods with higher poverty rates, creating a concentration of poverty and racial segregation in low opportunity and low resource areas. But new state laws require all jurisdictions to consider the question, how can we ensure equality of access to opportunity and help low-income residents and residents of color prosper? From a regional perspective, Union City is considered a moderate resource area that's shown in the teal color, compared to neighboring areas in Hayward and San Leandro that are considered low resource, and large swaths of the Bay Area that are considered high resource, shown in the dark blue. The dark blue areas are those that are considered as having high access to opportunity. Next slide, please. Next, I'm going to talk about one of the central pieces of the housing element, which is the fair share regional housing needs that are assigned to the city. In California, housing needs are assessed at a regional level based on projected population growth and other factors. A regional housing target, called a determination, is assigned by the state, by HCD, to each region. And then the regional government, and in this region, that's ABAG, or the Association of Bay Area Governments, develops a methodology to distribute the regional housing needs to every jurisdiction. This process is called the Regional Housing Needs Allocation, or RHNA, RHNA for short. HCD assigned the ABAG region over 440,000 housing units to be accommodated over the roughly 8-year planning period. Based on the final methodology adopted by ABAG, Union City's portion of that regional housing need is just under 3,000 units, 2,728 units. This nearly 3,000 housing unit target is broken down by the income levels that are shown here. You can also see how the RHNA for this housing element compares to the current housing element RHNA, which is shown to the left. It's more than double the current RHNA for the 2015 to 2023 period. The lower income RHNA, which is a combination of the very low and low income categories, is about 50% of the city's total RHNA. These are the income categories that are typically the hardest to meet. So a lot of the attention in the sites inventory is on how we're going to meet the lower income housing target. Recent housing construction has fallen far below the city's current RHNA target. The chart here shows the number of housing units by income level that were built over the last 7 years, since 2015, compared to the city's current housing target. However, with projects that have recently been approved, we expect more progress to be made toward meeting the city's new RHNA target in this next housing element planning period. Ultimately, it isn't the city's job to actually build housing. The city has an obligation to plan for housing by making sure that it has the right zoning and infrastructure in place to provide adequate sites to accommodate the housing target, the RHNA. And by also including a number of programs in the housing element to facilitate housing production. One important factor in planning for housing is density. Typically, the higher the density, the more affordable housing becomes. And according to state law for Union City, sites that have zoning that allows for at least 30 units per acre can be counted as meeting the lower income RHNA. 30 units per acre is the typical density for a 2 to 3 story apartment building. And the city has areas like the station district around the BART station that allow densities much higher than 30 units per acre. So where will the city be meeting its RHNA targets? Much of the city is already built out, with the exception of the area surrounding the BART station, which is known as the station district. This area has been and will continue to be an area where much of the new housing growth will happen in the city. The city is getting ready to publish a draft of the station district specific plan, which will establish new development standards for increased housing and mixed use development in this area surrounding the station. Based on our initial inventory of available housing sites, we estimate that about 80% of the capacity in the housing element sites inventory will be on the sites within the station district. There are also several large projects that have been approved in and around the station district. The city recently approved a large residential and mixed use project in the station district that's referred to as the Integral Project. The project is located in the area called Station East, and it is expected to provide 974 housing units, including 146 affordable housing units for lower income residents. Another project that's anticipated to be built during this housing element planning period is a project called Union Flats 2.0. This is located on what's called Block 2 of the core station district. And this project is planned to include 443 market rate apartments. Outside of the station district, just a little further to the northwest along Mission Boulevard, is an 80-unit affordable housing development known as Lazuli Landing. This project was approved in 2021 and is expected to be built during this housing element planning period. These are some of the larger projects that will get credited towards the city's housing target for this next housing element. In addition to approved projects, the housing element is going to identify other sites where there is potential for housing to be built in the next 8 years. We've started to identify our inventory of vacant and underutilized sites that are available to accommodate the RHNA. We haven't yet completed the inventory, but the draft housing element that we will be publishing this spring is going to contain a very detailed parcel-specific inventory that describes each of the available housing sites. This map shows just a quick look at our preliminary sites inventory. And what you see here is just our first cut at identifying where there's remaining capacity for new housing to be built. The yellow dots indicate where there's capacity for new single-family homes. The orange dots, where there's more medium density sites, and then the purple dots represent higher density multifamily sites. The size of the dot represents the number of units that could potentially be built. So the small yellow dots in the Dakota neighborhood, for example, those are just individual vacant lots where a single family home could be built. And then the larger purple dots, mostly in the station district, are the larger sites where apartment complexes could be built. This chart shows our preliminary findings for capacity for new housing by income level on those vacant sites and approved projects. Now, generally speaking, for the purpose of our housing element inventory, higher density sites where apartments can be built are assumed to accommodate the lower income housing need, whereas the sites where only single family homes can be built are assumed to accommodate the above moderate income need. For projects that have already been approved, like the Integral project or Union Flats, we inventory those market rate units as above moderate and any lower income units as lower income, regardless of the density. Now, these numbers are likely going to change a bit before we publish the draft housing element, but the bottom line is that we expect that the city will be able to show it has enough capacity to accommodate its RHNA at all income levels. That doesn't mean the city won't need to identify potential sites to rezone for housing in the future. The city has an obligation to maintain enough capacity to meet the RHNA throughout the 8-year planning period. So it's likely that additional sites will need to be added to the inventory to maintain enough capacity over that 8-year period. The housing policies and programs are really the heart of the housing element. The state conducts a very thorough review of the programs to ensure that the programs are addressing the city's housing needs and all of the very detailed requirements of state law. The city has a lot of programs and strategies already currently to address housing needs. This includes the city's inclusionary housing requirements. So the city currently requires 15% of units in new residential development projects to be affordable to lower income households. So this is one tool for ensuring that lower income housing gets built in the city. The city also has an agreement with the Tropic Tropics Mobile Home Park to provide rental assistance. The city also provides tenant-based rental assistance for low-income households in partnership with the city of Fremont through the HOME program. In 2016, the city formed a rent and tenant task force, and through the task force, the city adopted an eviction and harassment protection ordinance that requires landlords to provide a just reason for terminating a lease. The city also works with Echo Housing to provide fair housing services and tenant landlord counseling. The city works with Alameda County to administer a housing rehabilitation program. And recently, funding from the city has gone to minor home repairs for households in the Dakota neighborhood. And the city is also in the process of developing objective design standards to facilitate the construction of housing. The city is also adopting the station district specific plan to increase housing around the BART station, and adopting other ordinances in compliance with state law, including Senate Bill 9 ordinance. So those are just some of the current tools in the city's housing policy toolbox. And of course, through this housing element, we will be looking to develop new policies and new programs for the city to consider. So I'm going to talk about next steps in the process. We kicked off the project last fall, and since that time, we've been working with city staff to start our analysis. We're now starting our broader community engagement with 2 community workshops. One was last week, and then tonight is our second workshop. We also, over this past weekend on Saturday, had a booth at the farmers market where we had a chance to talk to a lot of residents about key housing issues and different strategies. And we've published an online survey that we encourage everyone here to complete. The survey is going to be available until March 18th. We're aiming to have a public review draft of the housing element ready in May, at which point we'll present the draft housing element to the community during Planning Commission and City Council meetings. Following those meetings, we will be revising the housing element to reflect any feedback from the community and the decision makers, and submitting the housing element to the state, to HCD, for their 90-day review period. After we've revised the housing element to address the state's comments, we will be back to the Planning Commission and the City Council for adoption, and we are targeting to hold those adoption hearings before the January 31st, 2023 deadline. As I mentioned, we have an online survey available. It's available in several languages, English, Spanish, Mandarin, Hindi, and Tagalog. And it would be really great to get your feedback on the survey on the housing challenges facing Union City. And my colleague has just dropped the links to the survey in the chat. So with that, that concludes our formal presentation tonight. We're happy to answer any questions you have on the housing element or hear any comments. Feel free to either use the Q&A feature at the bottom, or if you would like to speak, you can raise your hand and we will unmute you, and we would be happy to answer any questions or receive your comments. Thank you very much. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions or comments in the Q&A, but we'll give it a couple more minutes to see if anyone would like to ask a question. All right, Paloma, So Paloma, our interpreter, is here to help translate any questions you have. So please feel free to speak or to write in Spanish, we have help from our great interpreters tonight. All right, well, I'm not seeing any questions or comments from our audience, but thank you again for joining us tonight. We appreciate you taking the time out of your evening to attend our workshop and learn more about the housing element. Here on the screen, you can see a link to the housing element webpage on the city website, and you can look there for more information about the project and future updates. You can sign up to receive emails, and you will also see links to our survey, as well as copies of tonight's presentation. And very soon we will also be posting the recording of tonight's workshop. So again, thank you for joining us and have a wonderful evening.